IPSN's Blackbeard is their aggressive solution to piracy. It's meant to bring in other mechs, as well as people, into its reach to slice and dice them apart. The mech has this very lanky appearance, which seems to try and hide its strong melee attacks. You can tell this is a melee mech with some cooling issues by all the fans, and lack of any ranged weapons. There's also a lot of wear and tear on this mech, which is an IPSN staple we'll see throughout their mech line. What I like the most about the design is that it's rugged and utilitarian without being uninteresting to look at or lacking any unique identity. Moving to its abilities and combat role, Blackbeard is considered a striker, which means some middling defenses and strong damage. When looking through some of its systems, it's clear the mech is meant to pull people into melee range and start chopping them up. You can also see how it wants to grapple its foes, as it benefits some of its abilities, like the Bristle-Crowned Fletchet Launcher. Its core power, the Omni Harpoon, fits right into the idea that the mech just wants everyone as close as possible. The main downside appears to be its ability to defend itself from tech attacks. With an E defense of 6, a heat cap of 4, and its exposed reactor trait, the mech does not do well against attacks that focus on its core. It's best to find ways to release heat where possible if you find yourself gathering a decent amount. Finally, there's the Sekhmet NHP, available after unlocking the 3rd license. This has a couple of decent bonuses to your damage and action economy. However, you completely lose control of the mech outside of being able to overcharge it. As such, the NHP serves as a reminder that IPSN takes pirates very seriously, and when they send in mechs to handle them, there's not always a pilot in the mech to shoot. IPSN's Drake is meant to be a powerhouse of defense. It's IPSN's first military-grade mech design, and it shows. Looking like a suit of armor for a World War I soldier, the mech continues the trend of IPSN designs being functional rather than pretty. You also get a good look at its machine gun and ablative shield, clear as day in the art. I'm also in love with its little searchlight, which seems to be there just to further evoke the design's inspirations. While the mech itself looks like a World War I soldier, its mechanics work more like a tank. The Drake has an insane armor stat, takes up a decent chunk of space being a size 2 mech, and has loads of options for putting down cover and protecting other mechs on the field. The mech also has limited speed, making it ideal for missions where you want to be holding a position or if you're going through a gauntlet of other mechs. It also doesn't struggle as much to pack a wallop with the proper setup due to its Leviathan Heavy Assault Cannon, a super heavy weapon that has a damage range of 8 to 28, which is quite a lot for Lancer. Although, like the Blackbeard, it can struggle with tech attacks, with a mild E defense and heat cap. You'll be chewing through that heat cap too, with the assault cannon always upping your temperature, so it's best to upgrade your engineering if you're picking up this frame. If you're looking at all the ways this mech can pack a punch, and you're wondering if there were a way to make it tankier, look no further than its core power, which trades your movement to become a beacon of defense for all those who run past it. The core power shows what this mech is meant to do best. Stand still and fire a big gun. The Lancaster is actually a modified civilian mech. This explains its heavy reliability and its utility for moving objects and repairing pieces of technology. The mech is also unique in its silhouette, being one of a 4-legged creature rather than a person. You can see only one little gun on the mech, but a whole load of compartments and supplies likely meant for more common use cases. In addition, you can notice its tiny arms, which is used for tight work on larger devices. The Lancaster is a support mech and excels at that role. First of all, it has decent defenses with an actually respectable heat cap, and it can move around the battlefield no problem with its 6 speed. Additionally, it has a repair cap of 10, which is important given any allied mech adjacent to it can use those repairs in lieu of their own. Given it's a support mech, you only receive a weapon after acquiring the 3rd license, and even then, the weapon is supposed to be something for the environment rather than something to actually fight off enemies. Outside of that, the mech has some insane support skills. It can drag other mechs out of the fire, it can fully repair a mech by spending 4 of its own repairs, it can clear some conditions, send out drones to make the other mech stronger, and its core power allows it to actually heal HP on other mechs, or provide some bonuses if you need someone to be really accurate. The obvious downside to all of this is the Lancaster's inability to do any damage itself. It's very good at helping other mechs, but largely struggles to hurt other mechs. Definitely something you'd only pick up as part of a larger team. The Lancaster is a cool mech for a lot of the reasons I've discussed, but my favorite thing about the mech is that it makes playing a support feel really good. Sometimes you play other RPGs where playing a support feels like a necessary evil. You decide that someone has to play a healer and someone finally takes on the responsibility, so everyone else can have fun. That's not the case with the Lancaster. You can see how each of its systems are still supporting other mechs, but the support is huge. Bringing a mech back from death is no joke, and it's something you get at the 2nd license tier. The Lancaster shows how cool it can be to be a reliable part of the team. The Nelson is another striker from IPSN. It's the quintessential close quarters combat mech. Does that work in a world with guns and rail cannons? Well, let's take a look. Nelson's design is regal due to the endorsement contract with IPSN and Albatross. Its red, white, and gold color scheme makes it seem far more noble than some of the other mechs on display, and its two notable weapons, a war pike and a powered knuckle, are both displayed prominently. It's a design that screams confidence and power. The Nelson does two things well, moving fast and hitting hard. While this may seem obvious for any striker, the Nelson sets itself apart by having mech traits that allow it to gain bonus damage after boosting, and being able to move again after attacking another mech. If you engage its core power, it moves even faster after attacking. Additionally, the Nelson can easily ignore difficult terrain and control space with their war pike, which can be thrown on top of having excellent reach. By the time you fully level Nelson, it can boost up to a mech, punch them in the face, have that punch explode, knock the mech back 2 spaces, knock the mech prone, and then move 4 spaces away. The Nelson doesn't need a gun, it's the bullet. That said, the Nelson is considerably weakened when pinned down. Getting it grappled, immobilized, or slowed can basically shut down most of its options. Its lack of armor belies its very good evasion, and any decent tech attack is going to burn the mech up before long. That being said, if you can avoid getting pinned down, Nelson will be a powerful asset in nearly any group of Lancers. Use the momentum to your advantage, and pike the opposition when you can. Despite being effectively decommissioned by IPSN, the Raleigh is still popular among a smaller group of pilots. You can easily see why with its sombrero-like head, swanky cloak, and its propensity to ruin other mechs' day. While Raleigh's design is obviously meant to evoke cowboys and old Wild West films, it earns its biggest points for me by having some undeniable mech accoutrements. The strange placement of the second eye, the big shoulders which look to be venting heat, and something that seems deliberately off-theme, its big, scary hammer. Despite its focus on firearms, the Raleigh is actually a close-quarter striker. Many of its guns lack range, and many of them need time to load as well. That said, Raleigh's genius comes from the fact that loading weapons don't always require you to stop attacking for a turn. Its integrated mount, the M35 Mjolnir, shoots off at anyone if you're taking the time to reload your weapon. Additionally, you gain an NHP at the 3rd license tier that allows the Raleigh to shoot, albeit with low accuracy. I also love how its core power fills out the fantasy of shooting a bunch of people in a bar brawl that you often see in westerns. Regarding its weaknesses, the Raleigh probably struggles with moving around a lot as a striker. It has a bit of range to help with that, but I wonder if it struggles to keep up with other mechs, although that may be a bit of bias coming from the Nelson. Obviously, as a striker, it also struggles to control space and has some middling defense against heat. That said, much of this mech's abilities have it doing strong things even on their off turns with the ability Full Metal Jacket. The Raleigh is a bit of an oddball mech, but that's by design, and I'm sure its fans would be very livid if I didn't acknowledge how cool it can be and how powerfully it can fit the fantasy it's going for. The Tortuga is built to handle IPSN breach missions. IPSN has worked to build these mechs to withstand the dangerous exchange of breaches and succeed where other mechs may fail. You can tell at a glance why the Tortuga is a defender striker mech. It has armored plates all along its body and more weapons than a US military outpost. You can also tell that this and the Raleigh have similar origins since they both have the same kind of head design. The Tortuga in combat has a few different roles to play. First of all, they are focused on defending other mechs from getting harmed. Sentinel and Guardian allow the Tortuga to both punish enemies for trying to move past it, and assist allies who get close to it. This is further emphasized by its core power Hyper Reflex mode, which even stops enemies who get hit by Overwatch. Its second important job is to do damage to nearby enemies. You can see this with their emphasis on close quarters battle weapons like the Deck Sweeper and Daisy Cutter. It's also meant to shoot through cover to take down enemies with its through-bolt rounds and its siege ram. That said, if you require more defense, they may also take on hyper-dense armor, which practically forces enemies to get close to interact with you. The mech just wants everyone to stay close to it so it can lay the beat down on anyone nearby. This dual role is also reflected in its stats, having a low evasion but great armor, a solid E defense, and heat cap on top of that. It's the machine everyone wants to flock to for cover or to take it down. The Tortuga shows just how versatile a dual role mech can be in Lancer. It's not as specialized as some of the other builds, but as a result, it can fit into nearly any party which needs something with solid defensive damage. It makes sense that such a powerful and versatile mech is Tom's favorite. IPSN's Vlad is built to spike mechs. You can tell based on its nail gun, pointy lance, and sharp fangs all across its body. The design also contains 4 arms. The other set of arms are less visually interesting, one is a big shield and the other is just an arm, but altogether, Vlad's design evokes something dangerous to fight with. more like a monster than a man. Mechanically, the Vlad has some really good all-around stats. Being a controller and a striker means it gains some benefits from both. A standard speed, some E defense and evasion, along with its armor, make it quite formidable. You can see through its tools how it controls the battlefield while still putting the pain to other mechs. It also gains a lot of heat, so it's best to take some options to help manage that. The Impaler Nailgun, Webjaw Snare, and Charged Stakes keep opponents held in position with immobilized, which causes the mech to become shredded as well because of the Vlad's frame traits. Then when those mechs stop moving, the Vlad can put the hurt on with its Combat Drill and Impact Lance. This might make you want to rush up to the Vlad and hold it down, but if you do that, get ready to get clipped by its strike armor, and if its core power is up, it'll hurt quite a bit. This does mean though that the Vlad struggles with mechs who specialize in shooting from far away, with the Vlad sometimes struggling to get some of the range advantage as other mechs have. That said, once you are in range, the Vlad will kill you right quick. The Vlad is great at close quarters. IPSN is full of mechs like that, but what sets it apart is its ability to keep people in their place on the battlefield. The Vlad knows when it's time to cut and run, and when it's time to draw blood. Smith Shimano's Black Wing. Whoa! Are we allowed to show that? Okay. Smith Shimano's Black Witch is a controller support frame that enjoys popularity in the Karakan trade baronies. Its design evokes a witch with its staff being like a broom and its headpiece being a sort of hat. Unlike IPSN mechs, SSC tends to have more sleek, refined designs which reflect their status as a premium manufacturer. Also, to get out of the way, yes, that's Shibari. As a controller support, the Black Witch is surprisingly beefy with solid evasion and E defense. This along with its repulsor field and armor make the mech more sustainable. The Black Witch controls space with its magnetic fields which can be sent out through its cannon, its plates, or even with magnetic shields. The magnets can force movement or cause difficult terrain, giving them powerful control of other mechs. Some of its other system abilities make it hard for enemies to target it with tech attacks, its Ice Out Drone and Black Ice module specifically. This culminates in its core power, the Mag Field. This stops all of the attacks which move through a space, and stop any mechs walking through that space as well. Then, once the effect ends, all the attacks go to anyone still in the mag field. Very cool. Black Witch only really struggles with doing any real damage to other mechs. It has a single main aux mount, and the only damage dealing option it has is the magnetic cannon. That said, many of its tech options are very good at shutting down opponents and keeping itself safe. Black Witch is the book's introduction to SSC, and you can see their appeal almost immediately. Sleek, sexy, and absolutely devastating. Black Witch shows how powerful and focused the SSC mechs will be going forward. The Death's Head is our first artillery mech, and it's a fabulous one to start out with. It's hexapedal, and is obviously referencing the Tachikoma from Ghost in the Shell with its white and blue color scheme. You can tell that this mech is dangerous with its giant railgun taking center stage. The Death's Head has a lot of things going for it as an artillery mech with its decent heat cap, solid defenses, and excellent frame traits. You can also see its insane sensor range compared to what we've seen before, as well as its useful core power which, in junction with its railgun, makes it an absolute menace to any other member on the battlefield. Looking beyond the frame itself and at some of its license options, you can see that it can be quite the maneuverable little guy with the high-stress mag clamps. You'll also see how many of its abilities provided the best opportunity to shoot on its first attack at the expense of later attacks. It wants the player to focus down on one enemy to ruin their day, rather than attacking a bunch of enemies. It even has a way to track enemies that would otherwise attempt to hide from the Death's Head. This all comes at the cost of not being able to fight it out if any of the enemies manage to get in close. This leaves the Death's Head exposed, using just the license itself. However, with the right party composition, a controller can hold the mech down, while the Death's Head takes its shots. The Death's Head is a powerful mech when it hunkers down and snipes at people from the edge of the map. It has great coverage, good range, and solid options to avoid missing almost completely. That, while the design itself retains all of that SSC charm. The Dusk Wing is less of a mech and more of an exosuit, but that doesn't change its design from having 6 arms and an interesting set of ribbons. The pose chosen for the mech is one that seems light, which fits with its ability to hover while it moves. The design is quite good at conveying this strange and nimble mech. Dusk Wing is great at moving around the battlefield with its high speed, good evasion, and maneuverability jets. It does struggle a bit with its low heat cap and only decent E defense. It's also struggling against any hull attack with its fragile trait. Its core system allows it to control some space with after images that detonate upon contact with the enemy. It has a solid number of options to avoid getting hit, with the ability to inflict statuses to other mechs and turn invisible on their turn to get out of a jam. It also gets the ability to set up a wall which allies can huddle up against to stay safe. This works great with defenders who need to protect their current position as much as possible. I mentioned it before, but its main issue would be a mech that can ignore or work around its invisibility or conditions. Once it does that, or the Dusk Wing forgets to keep the invisibility on, the mech can then exploit its low heat cap and use some reliable weapons to avoid its high evasion. Dusk Wing is an easy mech to like for its strong control abilities that still do a ton to help your allies. Just look out where you're going because it could be a... The Metalmark is popular among the security contracts for a reason. You can see its powerful rail rifle and shock knife right in the art. With the visor on its head and its strange red and black color scheme, it seems more like a device the villains would use, rather than the heroes. Looking at it mechanically, and you'll notice its decent speed and evasion contrasted strongly with its weak E defense and heat cap. Luckily, it benefits more from soft cover than other mechs and has a great way of getting around other mechs' line of sight by constantly turning invisible. It turns invisible when moving, it turns invisible when bracing, it turns invisible when you want it to, and you can also make enemies unable to target any mech that's not adjacent to them. This makes the Metalmark very strong for getting in, blinding an enemy, and getting out as quickly as possible. Since it gains invisible while moving, it's also safer from Overwatch and other attacks triggered by movement. Yet, if you're not currently invisible, and if it's your opponent's turn, they may just overheat your systems and cause you to cook alive. That said, you can also put the hurt on your enemies by hitting them with the shock knife and activating your shock wreath to cause them to be basically blind. It's a strong set of options. What's also nice about the Metalmark is that everything wants to heat it up, so you get some extra mounts to put some weapons which don't immediately burn you to death. With its options and design, I almost wonder if this mech should be considered a striker controller, given how it's forcing enemies to move on its terms rather than their own. That said, you could say the controller aspect is more of a byproduct of its preferred method of getting damage. Either way, another powerful mech from Smith Shimano. The Monarch is SSC's artificially scarce mech, which pulls from nearly every other mech we've seen thus far in terms of design. The Monarch takes on this red and white color scheme which gives it the strong vibe of a sports car, although that may be its spoiler like missile launchers giving me that impression. Its stats are a solid all-rounder, although with some consideration given to its large sensor range. You can also see how it uses its ranged weapons to be a menace with its two frame traits, one making its critical hits even better, and the other making its single target damage even more devastating against heavily armed opponents. You'll also notice its core system, which just blows up a whole field of targets with little remorse. Its license abilities are also quite good, being able to give more range to weapons not a part of the license, being able to shoot multiple targets, and being able to set up spots for missiles to drop before your next turn. Overall, the Monarch is just a strong mech with powerful range. That said, its lack of close quarters options make it an easy mech to rush down and deal damage to. It also falls apart when considering a mech that can make itself invisible or undetectable. You'll have a much harder time hitting them before they close the distance for nasty melee attacks. That said, the Monarch is still one of the most iconic mechs in Lancer. It's on the cover of the special edition, it's got a striking design, and a really strong set of abilities. The Monarch gives off a premium feel. That may be the artificial scarcity talking. Mourning Cloak is a close quarters focused melee combat mech. It has a very striking pose, as though it's ready to pounce, which is a good way to emphasize its agility and hunter-like mechanics. It also has a very white color scheme and reminds me most clearly of an Evangelion. Its long sword, held in the worst way possible, also gives it a very cool and sleek look. The frame itself has some solid movement and evasion, but a worse E defense. One thing that's interesting about the Mourning Cloak is its decent sensor range. This is to help out with its Hunter Logic suite, which allows the mech to hide itself from targets or basically cause them to run in fear from it. The Mourning Cloak is supposed to be a slippery mech, which is seen in its Singularity Motivator, which allows it to teleport immediately after getting hit. You can also see how its weapons tend to do low damage, but they're all accurate and will end up hurting the enemies worse on a crit. Its core power assists further with the slipperiness of the mech by granting it more ways to just go wherever it'd like on the battlefield, at the cost of disappearing from reality for a little while. There's also its Fade Cloak, which makes it intangible half the time. It's a mech that doesn't have problems getting into range. That being said, it obviously still has some weaknesses. Chiefly, that E defense and heat cap are pretty rough. This, along with its lack of tech attack bonus, makes the frame feel like its electronic warfare can be lacking. If you can get over that though, you'll have a grand time zipping around the battlefield and slicing through all the other enemy mechs with your big sword and powerful movement. It's my favorite mech for its great design, solid options, and frankly, for having a big sword. Alright, I'm gonna say it. The Swallowtail can see the future. It's already predicted this entire video, and there's nothing we can do about it. The design reminds me most of a military drone, and you can see how it cloaks itself as invisible in the art for it as well. You also get a good look at its large gun up front, which reflects the Oracle LMG eye. As a support mech, the Swallowtail feels alright with decent E defense, good sensors, and importantly, a repair cap above 3. Additionally, its traits are excellent. The integrated cloak rewards sniping from a distance, and the prophetic scanners make a good condition even better. You can also use the core power to change how the battlefield actually went in the fiction by moving your ally and giving them resistance to all damage for whatever just hit them. You then have its license abilities, which are all amazing. You get way more information about your enemies with the Lotus Projector and the Athena class NHP. You also get options to hide out from other mechs or put a cloaking field around you and your allies to avoid any incoming damage. Sure, you have to deal with being a support. Your damage options are limited to the Oracle LMGI and whatever else you get, and you don't control space as much as a controller. But you will make the other mechs hate you for constantly making their hiding and invisibility not work. Swallowtail is the last of the SSC mechs, and what a way to go out. Such a great toolkit for defeating any of the sneaky mechs like the Mourning Cloak we just looked at. It has a strong set of abilities and traits which make it a menace to behold. Another great support mech in Lancer. To clear things up, Horus's mechs are less frames and more like a set of systems that are typically found with one another. As such, Union typically doesn't call Horus mechs frames, but pattern groups. While mechanically this doesn't affect anything, I want to make that clear so no one's confused as to why I'm calling these pattern groups. Balor is a swarm of bees congealed into a pattern group that works as both a striker and a defender. The design is evocative of a Balor, and you can see its fire like nanites, its whip, and its gun right there in the design. You'll notice that the naming scheme for Horus tends to be focused on mythical creatures, typically from D&D. The Balor stats tell the story you would expect from a striker defender. Decent defensive stats, strong health totals, not inert, but not fast either. You might look at these and consider everything alright, until you notice its complete lack of an armor stat. You would think for something that's a defender, it would have some sort of protection from straight damage. To find the damage mitigation, we need to look at its frame traits, specifically regeneration and self-perpetuating. These traits help support the idea of Balor being built from nanites, while also giving it some longevity needed for a defender mech. By the way, if you don't think the traits do enough as it is, you can always activate its core power, which allows you to make the regeneration even stronger, and it also makes your mech closer to its natural swarm-like state. You'll also notice you don't get a weapon from the frame itself until license level 3, but everything you get up to that point is truly amazing. You get powerful defensive control with Hive Drone and Swarm Body, your tech options get better with Scanner Swarm, or your weapons get better with Nano Composite Adaptation. The weapons are just icing on the cake. You get a strong whip that does a decent job of controlling space when you're rolling well, and there's also the gun that perpetually hurts the targets you shoot. All of the Balor's options are strong, but they require it to be close to other mechs most of the time, given its abysmal sensor range. This makes it weaker to mechs that can do strong damage from far away. That said, the Balor does its job very well. This is the book's introduction to Horus mechs, and it's a beast of a pattern group. You get this strong sense of how Horus subverts some of the understood dynamics so far. No other manufacturer focuses on nanites in this way. It's also a mech dripping with flavor in a lot of areas where I think other mechs can sometimes struggle. It has a strong theme and a strong set of options, which makes it a great mech in my books. The Goblin is barely larger than a hard suit, using its maneuverability and lightweight chassis to protect its pilot. The design evokes a literal goblin with large antennas working as its ears. The art even highlights its lightweight capabilities by showing off the pilot inside of the mech. You very clearly get the impression of a small creature when looking at the design, which is perfect for its namesake. The pattern group is considered a controller support mech, and its stats reflect its lightweight movements and technological prowess. Its agility and E-defense are nothing to sneeze at, and it has a great save target and sensor range. Its traits also double down on its technical prowess with an accuracy to all tech attacks and difficulty to all hull checks and saves. Its third trait also gives it a way to fight back against tech attacks it receives as well. This is reinforced by its singular flex mount, making the mech not even close to the primary damage dealer. Even its only weapon, the autopod, requires that someone else hit a mech that's already had lock-on consumed. If you're ever concerned about the longevity of your goblin, you're in luck, because its core power allows you to simply become part of another mech, like a blister. The mech gets all of your systems, E-defense, and tech attack capabilities. You also get to keep your actions, although you can't move for obvious reasons. Most of what the Goblin gets from its license is tech actions, which allow it more control over enemies and making sure its allies have an easier time. Options like Puppet System, Construct Other False Idol, and Dimensional Emblems make the mech all the more menacing when it comes to controlling space and keeping your allies safe. You also get a neat NHP that allows you to slowly infect the systems of the enemy mechs until they become an ally. How nice. The Goblin is purpose-built for attacking the very systems enemy mechs work on, which makes its biggest struggles clearer. The mech has low repair and heat caps, which make it susceptible to enemy fire. If you're smart about where you're hiding though, you can avoid lots of that damage. On top of that, the core power does a good job if you're in a jam. Overall, the Goblin is a juggernaut of powerful system control, while still remaining in a relatively small package. The Gorgon pattern group is a strange one for Horus, given that it's meant to defend its allies and protect its pilot, although you can see from the art that the pilot is not always a necessary component of the Gorgon strategy. Perched in a very interesting way, the Gorgon is by far one of the most alien mechs we've seen thus far in Lancer. The stats tell a story of a defender mech: solid health total, low evasion, a surprisingly high E defense, and a low but not terrible speed. Gorgon's high E defense pairs nicely with its Scorpion V70.1, which allows it to harm enemies who fail to hit them or an adjacent allied character with a tech attack. By the way, if there's any mech so far that hates computers, it's this one. Its core power is literally putting a memetic virus into the system structure of any poor soul you manage to hit it with. The information immediately begins to cascade NHPs and literally blow the brains out of any pilot. Otherwise, its traits reinforce its power dynamic by giving it 2 reactions, allowing allies to use it for cover, and stunning any creature unfortunate enough to miss it. The mech also has mounts galore, so make sure you outfit it with something nice. Its laser also has a great reaction to mow down any enemy who shoots anyone close to you. Oh, and you eventually gain an NHP that gives you 2 extra reactions just to beat people down who try to get you in close quarters. The Gorgon only really struggles against any sort of reliable damage dealer. Weapons with the reliable tag are particularly nasty given the mech has no armor. Another thing it could struggle with are long distance mechs. The Gorgon's best abilities have limited reach, so if something was attacking your allies from super far away, I'm not sure the Gorgon would have a great answer for it. Otherwise, it's just filling out the defender role well while still having some really strong systems attacks. The Gorgon is a great mech that goes to show that even Horus sometimes thinks about the pilot inside of the mech. It does its job of defending in close quarters very well. We'll just have to see how long that NHP lasts though. The Hydra pattern group is a precursor to the Balor. Instead of nanites being used to control all of its functions, the Hydra uses many drones it then deploys. The drones are present in its design, along with the implication that much of the mech can be deployed as drones themselves. It's more of an eerie design, if anything, quite alien, and I imagine no fun to look at. The Hydra is labeled a striker controller, and it does this through its powerful weapons, which have decent range and can be fired from any of its drones. Drones are its bread and butter, so you get lots of them to play with and deploy. Its core power even allows you to deploy many of its most powerful drones at once. You also have some decent tech-based options as a result of its tech attack bonus and its decent abilities from Puppet Master. The mech's overall stats are pretty decent, although I'm a little worried about its evasion being so low with a low HP pool on top of that. That said, it doesn't really need to put itself out there in combat to really do damage and take names. Its frame traits also help all of its drones live longer and helps any of them who sit adjacent to the Hydra by giving them resistance. The biggest thing holding the Hydra back is if it loses all of its drones. It's likely dead in the water with little else to do. You'd also have some trouble if the main mech is far away from its drones with little protection. There's also its lack of mounts, which makes it difficult to make up for the lack of combat prowess the pattern group itself has. Hydra is the first Horus mech I don't feel that strongly about. Usually, even if I don't enjoy a combat role a Horus mech plays, I can still find myself enjoying its flavor and themes. For Hydra though, it's just really good with drones, which is cool, but I honestly don't feel that sense of awe I got from the Balor or the Goblin. That all being said, it's still a decent mech with some cool features to make it feel like you're starting an unending assault of drones to the other mechs on the map. The Manticore is a new pattern group from Horus and is so effective against what Union is dishing out that all manufacturers are attempting to come up with solutions for it. The design is like a mix between a crab and a porcupine, with its large spikes working as its cooling system, which we'll get to momentarily. All the energy and power coming off the mech though feels very in theme, as though portraying something dark and powerful. When looking at the stats, you'll notice it's trading evasion for solid armor, and it even has a decent heat cap to boot. You'll also notice how its traits first have to do with some very good resistances, and then divulge into how well the mech tends to blow up when you're inside of it. It's basically an instant kill if you hit anyone with Castigate the Enemies the Godhead, but you're included in the kill count. You'll also notice that the mech loves taking on heat and burning everyone next to it. This includes its core system and its core power, which both benefit from self-inflicted heat and energy damage. Its tech actions are going to continuously cause its core power to become stronger, along with its lightning generator, which uses the danger zone to its advantage. The Manticore uses all of these things to absolutely decimate anyone nearby and to throw attacks back at the people hurting it. When it comes to weaknesses, generally managing heat and damage is your biggest priority. Managing heat can be trivialized with some talents, but making sure you're not just cooking yourself to death is a huge priority. On top of that, if you're constantly getting pelted by armor-piercing rounds, you will just die without much fanfare. That said, you've got some great close quarters damage, and you've got allies who probably want you to live, so using those can help avoid some of those unfortunate situations. The Manticore reminds me most of D&D's Barbarian. It's a mech that absolutely revels in being targeted and attacking others as hard as possible. It might be a good mech to start out with because of that. given that it tends to do better when it's taking damage and receiving tech attacks compared to other mechs. It also has some funny ability names for the player to enjoy. The Minotaur is a quadrupedal nightmare machine with little arms to shoot the bad guys. It truly looks like a horrid union of something mythical and technological, a menace to any other mech on the battlefield. It also has a neat little star system inside its chassis if you look in. The Minotaur works as a controller pattern group, with stats that reflect that with good use of its tech attack, but virtually no armor to speak of. It has some neat traits where the pilot can't be hurt while inside the mech, and all creatures must stop moving when trying to pass them, regardless of size. This all feeds to its systems, which force any mech it wants to just stop moving. Further emphasized with its Metafold Maze passive ability, which makes it even stronger with its tech attack options, and its Maze core power, which forces an enemy to stop until they make a half-decent system save. From the license, the Minotaur gives some good area control abilities with few actual damage dealing options. That said, its invade and full tech options are nothing to sneeze at. Almost all of them force an opponent to stop completely in their tracks, making quick-moving, high-damage mechs almost a non-issue. It can also force opposing mechs to take their attacks elsewhere and have them attack other mechs or run away. You can definitely see how it got that controller label. When looking at what makes the Minotaur weak, it's the lack of strong damage dealing options. Some of its license abilities give heat, which is nice, but having something unique and damaging on its own would also be nice. I also think that, although its abilities are strong, it's held back a little by its sensor range. What you could do though is grab its abilities and swap to a frame with an insane sensor range, or use the Goblin's core power to be more effective in that respect. The Minotaur's great control is something to behold, but it does make me mindful that Lancer is ultimately a team game, which means you can't always rely on yourself to take down enemies. You need to be thinking about how you can help your allies and build your mech to help the team as a whole. The big non-gun sticking out of its strange fleshy back. It appears like a predator looking for its next kill. If the Mourning Cloak reminds me most of an Evangelion, the Pegasus reminds me of its mass production cousins. A horrifying design that only continues to get worse as we investigate what this mech can do. It's an artillery mech with some decent tech stats, which is important for some of its license abilities. Additionally, it can decide to take the average damage roll whenever possible. Its other trait? I don't know what you're talking about. The Ushabti Omnigun is its built-in weapon, and pings certain enemies within range 15 with armor-piercing damage for free. Using its core power simply allows you to do this more often, which fits nicely into its Hunter Lock ability, which allows the Pegasus to do bonus damage whenever it hits. It also has a very good smart gun and a mimic gun that might be really good or really bad depending on certain factors. It can also have an NHP that allows it to completely change the results of any d20 roll before the end of its next turn. It has great options at range and has some extremely powerful tech options to make it better at seeking enemies and destroying them on sight. Its biggest con is its inability to lock anyone down or push back at anyone trying to get into its range. Its long range can get subverted simply by something really fast, especially if they had some assistance. Additionally, it does damage that can sometimes be decent, but it still mostly relies on chance to ensure the damage it's doing isn't getting completely absorbed by its opponents. That said, the Pegasus still shows off the cool way that Lancer builds story and theming into every single mech. Its abilities, traits, and art all show off what makes this mech feel strange and alien compared to the others. Best represented by its most prominent feature. Standing at a frightening 13 meters, the Barbarossa is our introduction to Harrison Armory. You can see how it seems to be just a slab of metal in terms of design, with lots of weapons strewn about. It also brought its lunchbox, that's nice. The Barbarossa is an artillery mech with terrible evasion, speed, and e-defense, but you can rely on its strong armor and health pool to keep it in the fight. This mech doesn't really want to move at all, unable to be knocked prone, or be pushed, or be pulled by any other mech. Additionally, it can't move very well itself, getting a difficulty added to all of its agility checks. Other than that, you'll notice its core power, the Apocalypse Rail, a railgun that's integrated into the frame that you charge by standing still, and the longer you wait, the more powerful it becomes. Its other license abilities are good for attacking opponents from far away using drones, bombs, and grenades. It also gets a big weapon, and a system which allows you to easily load it using a quick action. The Barbarossa may look like a fortress, but honestly, it takes one mech with an armor-piercing weapon with decent range to take it down. It can't close distance very well at all, and it relies on its armor to defend itself as much as possible. As long as you can push through its resistances, you really shouldn't have a hard time putting it down. That being said, the Barbarossa is the only size 3 mech available in Lancer's core rules. It's also still quite tanky for an artillery mech, which adds to its utility in fights. A strong mech overall. The Genghis is built to burn other mechs down. This is reflected in its 2 big flamethrowers in its art, along with its orange accents. It also has a myriad of vents near its joints, which also give off the impression that it's constantly offloading heat. The frame is one of the most well-guarded strikers in the game. With an armor stat of 3, it makes sense why it would have a low HP total and a low evasion. On top of that, one of the frame traits gives it immunity to a whole damage type, which is another thing which allows it to push through difficult situations. Oh, and if you were worried about its low E defense, don't be. With its high heat cap and ability to burn off heat using some of its systems and its core power, the Genghis does fine while heating up. This is, of course, forgetting to mention the powerful flamethrowers that it gets as part of the license. These puppies will burn all your enemies and do it in large cones, which help these things get coverage. Its super heavy plasma thrower also makes dangerous terrain for your foes to run through, which actually gives the Genghis some slight control abilities. The Genghis' weakness is unfortunately summed up in 2 words: armor piercing. Weapons that can actually do serious damage to it can put it on a cascade of failure as it continues to lose structure and heat. In addition, it still struggles with enemies that can pick it off from a distance given its middling speed and lack of range. When those factors are considered, I think the Genghis is still an interesting mech with some cool abilities, but I feel it would be trivially easy to get around if you're not being careful with your weapon and tactical choices. The most striking thing about Iskander's design is its stark blue color scheme. Most of the Harrison Armory line are full of these bright oranges and cool grays, so having something with a simple blue hue is really refreshing for the line. You can see it does something unique with its design, having no weapons, but these discs that seemingly affect the ground. The Iskander is a controller frame and uses gravity manipulation to control where it can. It has decent stats with a slight preference for its systems, along with a decent E defense and an inherent bonus to its tech attack. You can also see how its traits emphasizes throwing out as many mines as possible, none of which you trigger by moving. You also gain the core power Death Cloud, which basically makes it impossible for any of the enemies to move unless they want to take an explosion to the face. Through the license, you also gain some strong abilities built around dropping more mines, setting all of them off, and moving opponent positions or even just making them float around helplessly. This gives the Iskander strong flavor as a gravity controller and makes it formidable for controlling enemy positions on the battlefield. Controller mechs like Iskander usually struggle against close-range targets, but the Iskander actually gets a close-quarters weapon, which provides it some degree of safety from enemies trying to get real close. That said, it could still struggle against them and requires a bit of setup to have all the mines in appropriate places. You have to really consider the battlefield if you decide to use this mech. Overall though, this is a big win for me in terms of flavor and execution. Using this mech, I can see myself constantly shifting mech positions, dropping mines, and causing them to float around for fun. A mech that does exactly what it says on the tin. While the historic Napoleon was not actually that short, the Lancer Napoleon certainly is. It is a size 1/2 mech with some neat plates floating around its body. It has a very cool orange and blue color scheme, as well as its very special gun, which we're going to talk about soon enough. The mech is a defender controller with some standard defenses and a half-decent save target. Its big thing is being able to brace to reduce damage to 1, and reducing all save damage to 1 as well. Its core power doubles down on this technique, allowing it to reduce all damage to 1, unless the damage cannot be reduced, of course. This does put it in a state where it can attack, but given that it has an armor rating of 2, the damage simply wouldn't hurt it most of the time. You'd have to cook it with tech attacks. Its abilities liberally use these floating plates, which seem to have a small blink field generating with them, which lets the Napoleon use them to set up walls, shoot through space, and set up a shield to prevent other mechs from moving through it. The other big thing is only something you gain at your 3rd license level called Displacer. This weapon is so good, it will immediately cause your mech to melt down, but it does 10 energy damage from 10 spaces away in a burst. It's good enough to cost that much heat. Although it does show off the major issue with the Napoleon, heat management on this thing is truly terrible. A heat cap of 8 is decent, and by the time you get the Displacer, you could probably level your engineering enough to not immediately get thrown into meltdown, but you'd still be in the danger zone. This is on top of just attracting tech attacks to it as a result of its strong damage reduction. That said, it's something you can start to mitigate using your talents and smart use of your abilities. The Napoleon is a funny mech to me. It's small and powerful, exactly what the name wants to imply, yet its core gimmick is one that prevents it from taking any actual damage, because if it did, it'd fall instantaneously. Big Sal is a walking shield made out of heavy metal. Its black and white design is adorned with these beautiful orange accents from its shield arm and its headpiece. You can also see its large battery pack, which presumably powers the tachyon shield the Saladin can use. It's also got a big gun, which is nice. Big Sal's stats are fitting. With an armor of 1 and an HP of 12, it's very likely sticking around. It's also got a decent heat cap of 8, which gives it some freedom to take on tech attacks as well as physical hits. Its traits grant it immunity to status condition, which is always nice. It can also give difficulty to any attack against it or an allied character within 10 spaces, which is great. Its core power is the tachyon shield mentioned earlier, which protects your allies and makes it much easier to defend them from attacks. On top of that, if the attack misses, the pilot can decide that it redirects to hit something or someone else. A great core power for the big shield boy. Its abilities are nothing to sneeze at either, with it also having shields to give allies resistance the moment they're attacked, a half-decent weapon, some tools to defend allies against getting pushed around, and of course the NHP that takes any missed attacks and throws it back to the opponent. What it is missing though is reliable damage outside of that. It's also possible that something with the reliable trait could chip away at it, but it's more likely that the Saladin just wouldn't be able to get in and deal any significant damage to any enemy mech without some tinkering with some of the other frames and some talents. That said, you could probably strap on a decent rifle from GMS on it and see if it could make up for it then, or just continue doing what it does best, which is defending itself and its allies with its big shield. Last thing I wanted to mention here is that in lore, the Saladin is treated as a hero mech, and apparently gets you free drinks at any bar from one of the emancipated worlds. While this is a small detail, I think it gives a good impression of how different manufacturers are received on different worlds, which is important to understand if you want to run this game and really get the feeling of the world right. But perhaps that's more for a later video. The Sherman has a lovely Christmas tree color scheme with its strong maroon and alien green colors. The heat radiating from its center is also visible in the art, making it seem like the Sherman is always running hot. Spoilers, it is. Sherman was one of the quickest mechs to read, and it has to do with it being so straightforward. It wants to be on fire. Sure, you might look at its middling E defense and think that it might be a bad thing that it can get so heated, but you're wrong. You can decide to stay in the danger zone when you want, which helps some of your weapons. You get soft cover when you get too much heat anyway, and the fire inside the mech burns so hot it produces an energy beam capable of blowing a hole through so many mechs. Your core power is charging up that beam very quickly. Other than that, you get decent range with its weapons, and each of them burns you up, but that's what you wanted anyway. Some special mentions to the Tachyon Lance, which, while burning up the Sherman, also just destroys literally any mech on the field that's trying to just live for longer than 2 rounds. Because it's so heat focused, you should really be wondering about the fact that its evasion is so low. It just takes one mech to get in close and hit you with a flurry of attacks before you're completely gone. That said, taking some sort of melee weapon would allow you some longevity to fight against attacks like those. Another thing I don't like about the mech is the number of system points you get basically require you to invest in systems if you want to even use 2 of the 3 system intense things that the license provides to you. That being said, if you were really worried about your computer system, you probably wouldn't be running the frame that constantly overheats it. The Sherman is a great example of a risk-reward mech and how interesting riding the line between efficiency and total destruction can be. The Tokugawa is the anime protagonist mech, built for going beyond your limits. It also has 4 fire swords, that classic Harrison Armory orange core, and a simple but imposing design. The frame works beautifully to emphasize Harrison Armory's attachment for very anthropomorphic styled mechs. Its stats tell its story quite well. Some decent defenses against physical attacks and some bad E defense, but with a very good heat cap. The Tokugawa wants to be in the danger zone, which you can see with its plasma sheath trait and its various weapons which benefit it for grabbing as much heat as possible. Its core power making it even stronger as the pilot overclocks the mech and gains insane range and power. Its abilities lean into this as well, almost everything benefiting from limit break and radiance. You can also give it batteries to make its range even crazier. You do run the risk of it blowing up on you though. There's also the heat sink, which allows you to get in the danger zone quickly, but stay in there for much longer. You can also pick up an NHP that turns your current heat total into bonus damage at the cost of putting yourself further into the danger zone. This does paint a picture of a powerful mech, but I will mention that without a talent like Nuclear Cavalier or some other way to avoid gaining too much heat, the Tokugawa doesn't actually gain anything from exceeding its heat cap. You need to take outside options to control that, which is sort of unfortunate. Another thing is that because of its E defense being so weak, the mech is actually susceptible to tech attacks which put it above its heat cap, which could undo a lot of the work that it's trying to do. With all of that said, the Tokugawa is one of the most fun mechs to play in my experience. Sort of like the Sherman, where you ride the edge of too much or too little heat. You're constantly looking for ways to either heat yourself up or cool yourself off. It also just really lends itself well to the stories of pilots pushing their limits and becoming stronger than they were before.